LibertyCon. This is the No Shit There I Was panel, and tonight we are going to be going through stuff. Probably we shouldn't be talking about because secrets and things like that. So we're going to go around the panel, and the beautiful Kacey Ezell gets to lead the charge. Tell us about yourself, lady.
Hey everyone, my name is Kacey Ezell. I write science fiction, fantasy, and a couple of other things. And in my secret identity, I'm an active duty U.S. Air Force officer. I fly UH-1N Huey helicopters, which, yes, they do still exist. And yes, someone does still fly them. And yes, the Air Force does have helicopters. All of those things are true. And I'm currently right now stationed in just outside of Tokyo, Japan.
Gants.
All right. My name is Michael Gants. I am a science fiction and fantasy author. Retired naval enlisted, did 20 years on submarines as a nuclear engineer, which has not affected me in the least.
Kevin.
How do you follow that?
No. Mr. Twitchy over here, been around the nuke reactor too many days.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, everybody, I'm Kevin Ikenberry. I write primarily science fiction. I'm a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel. Spent the first 2/3 of my career in the Army Reserve and then spent the last third back on active duty as a space operations officer. So, yes, the Army has space, and I was Space Force before it was cool.
And Brad.
All right, so I'm Brad R. Torgerson, most known for my science fiction stories, published with Bain, published with Analog Magazine. My military career is POG for the Army Reserve. I'm a personnel warrant, of all things, so I can talk the warrant officer angle. And hello. And
I am your host and moderator, William Joseph Roberts. I write sci-fi, fantasy, horror, whatever the evil mind squirrels demand of me, and I made it to the grand old rank of staff sergeant. I was the grumpy old dude on the flight line working on F-15s back in the day. I guess I'm the lowest ranking dude here. Freaking officers, man. We're outnumbered.
That's why you're the moderator.
Hey, wait, what? You guys remember when Saddam started moving south? Just before we put the real hurting on him. I was actually deployed. I was stationed in Doha, Qatar at the time with the 335th Fighter Squadron out of Seymour Johnson. And this was my second deployment. Yeah, it was my second deployment to Doha. So we actually had some hardened shelters. We had some bunkers, things like that. Before, it was just tent city. I mean, we tore down and built up every time we came in. But it was surreal. I mean, we were packed up. We were ready to come home. We were leaving the next day. We had all of our equipment ready to go. And I get woke up by somebody. And I don't even remember who it was that come in and waking me up. It's like, hey, hillbilly, we're staying. We're not going anywhere. Saddam's moving south. The war started. What? I get up. And the next thing you know, we had smuggled in beer from Germany. I don't remember who managed to get it in. We had a C-130 come in full of beer. We had a beer tent put up in less than 6 hours with ration cards. It was crazy, man. That one whole day seemed so surreal and like it never even happened. And we were there for another 45 days after that because they left us in place. We were already there. They didn't want to move the F-15s that we had. We had F-15Es out of Seymour Johnson. And they didn't want to move us because we were ready to fight. And if we would have been transitioning, with another unit, it leaves a gap.
Yeah.
So what year is that approximately?
97.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah, because
that's the no-fly zone. That's all the no-fly zone crap.
Yeah, that was the no-fly zone. They had breached the no-fly zone. They were moving tanks south. And see, was it 90? When was Dahran? Was that 96? End of 90. No, it was early 96 was Dahran. That was my first deployment. I mean, I'm green. I'm new. I'd been in roughly a year. And the grapevine had been talking about there was going to be an attack. And, after the fact, we found out that Doha, Qatar was one of the targets.
Right.
And we lost a lot of good people at Daharon. You know, they drove a fuel truck in loaded with explosives, parked it right next to the dorm, and you know, I didn't lose anybody directly linked to me, but I know a lot of people that did lose a lot of people.
Sure. Sure.
You know, folks stationed out of Eglin and all that.
That was Kobar.
Yeah, that was Kobar Towers.
Kobar Towers.
Yeah, Kobar Towers.
And you know, that's another one of those surreal things. After the fact, we found out they knew there was going to be attack, but they wasn't sure where.
So
and, us being in Doha, we had nothing. We were bare-based, tent city. There were no hardened shelters. There were no defenses. If they wanted to roll in there, they could have, because we didn't even have barbed wire at that time.
So Al Udeid, that was not what it is now, right? The Al Udeid, I'm assuming, they weren't sharing any of that real estate back then?
No.
Okay.
I mean, we were just off the runway on the far end of the international airport at that time.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
we had
And, you know,
sturgeon at Malmstrom.
it was, I mean, it was bare base. You might get to wash up once every 3 days with a water bottle because we had no water.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, we were tent city, and everybody, you know, picks on the Air Force. Yeah, we can rough it, and us hillbillies know how to survive in this crap. Even if it, you know, gingers like me shouldn't belong in this sandbox because, man, months and months and months of being a freaking lobster sucks.
Yeah. Well, it gets. Here's the thing about Qatar too. Qatar is oppressively humid.
Yeah.
Yes.
You don't get dry. So if you have no way of going into a enclosed climate controlled space, you will never get dry. Nothing. All your crevices, everything will be sweaty and
Taji.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Taji was like that too. Because I spent a year at Taji, and like one of the weirdest things was that, you know, they'd get those Haboob sandstorms where the dust is so fine it just hangs suspended in the air for like 3 days.
Oh,
so like one of the weirdest experiences I ever had was, you know, I'd go walk from my room, go to the Cadillac, take a shower, come back, walk back to my room, and as I'm combing out my hair, I'm wringing mud out of it because it's wet. My hair was wet. It didn't dry. I couldn't dry it. Like I could stand there under a blow dryer for 3 hours and it would still be wet because it was just so humid. Sure. And then walking back through the air, the dust in the air, combing the mud out of my hair, I was like, this is gross.
I hate to say this, but it's true for, I think, many of those countries. I always ask, like I can understand like Jordan. Jordan actually has what I would call seasons and a climate. But some of these places, I'm like, how in the heck did somebody come here originally thousands of years ago and say, hey, we're going to settle on this. This is where we're going to live.
Yeah. I mean, climates weren't always what they are today, right? Like,
true.
You know,
true.
So,
yeah, supposedly there were palm trees and green grass in Egypt.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
During the time of the pyramids, it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be, you know, tropical paradise in Egypt 6,000 years ago.
Well, you know, Qatar, I mean, they've got olive groves and palm dates and all that there. They've got a thriving industry based on that.
Right.
Well, and remember the cedars of Lebanon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's happened is several thousand years of people being around those areas, herding goats, herding camel, and not understanding how to conserve what they had. And, you know, it's unfortunate. That's just the way it's gone.
Well, and I think some of it's too is just natural, like climate change, erosion.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that, yeah. So.
Well, and dealing with the Persian Gulf being as shallow as it is, like you said, there's no prevailing winds to speak of. So the water evaporates and just sits there.
Yeah.
It doesn't go anywhere.
I know that was an eye opener for me on my first deployment. When the tropical storm hit, we were at Al Udeid, and it was very dramatic. And you're right, because it went from like hot and incredibly humid to suddenly the temp dropped about 25 degrees in a few minutes, and then it was just horrific thunder and torrential rain for about 4 hours. And then it all went away and went back to normal, and it was insufferable. You know.
Wait, when was this?
I want to say 16. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
16. Yep.
We never had any. We would get those. We would get the I don't know if monsoon is the right word, because I don't know if it's like that type of climate interaction that's happening, but we would get those storms like that at Taji too, where it was just this all out downpour, 0 feet visibility. You couldn't see, your hand stretched out in front of your face just because it's the tree. But, and then,
Yeah.
and all it would do is up the humidity. And you're like, come on, man.
Yeah. I was surprised when I was in. Yeah. It's like, can it get worse? Oh, it did just get worse. Yeah. So one thing you talked about Saddam was threatening you guys. One thing that was interesting too when I was at Al Udeid is they had the Patriot batteries around the edge of the base, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, because you think of Qatar, that's fairly well protected. It's not like Kuwait where Iran is just next door, and you've got a lot of potential for some friction there. But we were considered a prime target for Iran with their missiles, so they had the Patriot batteries out there. I know we had a lot of B-1s flying out of Qatar too. I don't know where they were going. You would see them and you would hear them.
Wait, where were they at? Al Udeid?
Yeah, the B-1s, at least when I was there in 16, were going out of there. 15, 16, yeah.
So, Kacey, what was probably the most humorous thing that happened early in your career? Back in that, William talked about being green. For you, what was the big thing that happened to you that was humorous about that early time period in your career?
And if you want to harass Boy Kacey, that's okay, because we can laugh at him. He's not here.
No, Boy Kacey. For those of you who know Kacey Morris, he and we actually met at the Air Force Academy. He was originally a classmate of mine, and then he had a back injury during our basic cadet training, and so he watched back a year. He came back with the class of 2000, and we met when I guess it was my sophomore year, because I was dating a guy that had gone to high school with him, and so that's how we met. And then we re-met again after I had just graduated from pilot training with my friend Tammy Archuleta, who she and Kacey had met at survival school and were dating. I guess I could tell that story. He might not appreciate it though.
We can harass him later. It's okay.
Okay. Oh my God. I'm supposed to stay at his house, you guys, next week, and he might kick me out for this. But Kacey,
tell him Hillbilly's holding his next manuscript, so it's okay.
Kacey was, for those of you who don't know, Kacey was engaged to my friend Tammy Archuleta when she was killed in Afghanistan in 2003, so that's the Tammy that I'm talking about. So the way that they met at SEER, so SEER is Survival, Evasion, Resistance, Escape. It's the training that air crews go through for a simulated capture experience. And at the time, I don't know how they're doing it now, but at the time, the way that they did it was if you went through the Air Force Academy, you did part of the training as an academy cadet. You did combat survival training, which is everything but the POW experience, essentially, the resistance training. And so if you were an academy cadet, you did what was called top off at Fairchild Air Force Base, which is where SEER training still happens. And you would show up so for us academy grads, we would show up on one of the days and get on a bus and get driven out to the field where everyone else had been living for 2 weeks doing their survival stuff. And we would get dropped off, and we were all clean, and they'd been living in the woods. And they didn't like that. And then we would start, basically just jump right into the course with them. And the way that they did it is you were in the field for a day, cold, with no training, just so that you're kind of to give you some situational awareness, so that when you came back after that day, they brought you back, and then you had a weekend's worth of academic classroom time, where they taught you okay, these are the techniques we want you to use. This is how you get through this. This is what you do, and then you went back into the field, back into the immersive experience for another couple days. So they had just come out. They had just had that first cold experience, and then been brought back out for their weekend worth of academics. And that night there was a bar called the Final Point on Fairchild that was like, because you weren't, as a SEER student, you weren't really allowed to like leave the base or go out into Spokane or anything. But they had this little bar there that was there for SEER students, and it's called the Final Point. And Kacey and his buddies were sitting at the Final Point, and he hears this female voice behind him because he's sitting with his back to the bar. He hears this female voice behind him walk up to the bar and order a Guinness, and he's like, "Excuse me, I like Guinness and ladies." Like, you know? And he invited her to join their table, and she did, and they really hit it off. And as I said, it was a weekend's worth of academics, and you're all staying in the same like dorm, which really isn't a dorm, it's like billeting, right? So it's a hotel, and we spent the whole weekend together, just totally hit it off. And so the next like 2 days later, they're done with their academics. They go into they get back on the bus and go back into the camp, and you're back in the like the immersive experience where you're being treated like you've just been captured and stuff. And one of the things that they do is a strip search. And so the way that it was set up at the time is that the cells, they had like there was like 2 cells, and it was 1 person per cell, but it was 1 door that covered 2 cells, like a big, like almost barn door sort of thing. And so when your neighbor was being strip searched, like you could hear it, right? And so so they they make him take all this shit off, and they do the like, they check him out and everything, and then they're like, all right, turn around. Kacey turns around, and the guy's like the SEER instructor is like, holy shit, dude, what happened to your back? Never mind.
Wait, I don't know if we can tell that one.
And so his neighbor is like, Kacey, what happened to your back? And Casey's like, nothing. Go to sleep.
So it was a very good weekend. He enjoyed his weekend quite a bit.
You're right. I think Kacey has more pleasant memories of SEER than most people.
Apparently, the sheets were rather rough. Low count.
Yeah,
for the cotton.
Scratchy, you might say.
That's funny.
Oh God, you guys are going to cause me editing now. Crap. We'll have to see what Rich and them says. Okay, so next story. Who's got something else that doesn't involve that crap?
I'll go ahead and go. So I was trained as a nuclear engineer in the Navy, and it is one of those courses. It is 6 months of academics that are the equivalent of 2 years of technical school, followed by 6 months of actual operation of a reactor that is moored to shore, that is about the equivalent of another 2 years of technical college. So you come out of it very serious, and that's something that Admiral Rickover, when he developed the program, really wanted, is an understanding of how dangerous our job was, how serious it was, and everything else. So I was stationed in Charleston on the USS Seahorse, SSN 669 at the time, my first submarine. I'd been there about 4 days, and they had just come back from a short deployment. So most of the people were on leave, and there really wasn't much going on. So they decided
that Los Angeles class?
No, that was a Sturgeon class.
Oh, okay.
637 class.
Okay.
And so the job I got assigned was scraping bilges and repainting, because it's an easy job for somebody who doesn't have much training on the ship to do. So, like I said, it's my 4th day. It's about 3 a.m. in the morning. I'm coming up. I've got the bag over my thing, and I'm walking by maneuvering. And maneuvering is where you control the reactor from. And I noticed the lights are off, which is a real big surprise. Normally, the lights are never off in maneuvering. And I kind of pause, and I glance in there. And the shutdown roving watch has got this tiny little red toy fireman's hat on. And he's standing in front of the throttles, and these throttles are really big. You're like this on them. And he's whipping them back and forth. And the shutdown reactor operator is flipping alarms, so it sounds like a fire engine's going off, and lights are blinking and everything. And he's like, "Oh, we're going to get to the fire." And I'm just sitting there. Completely blew away my idea of serious nuclear power and how it is done. Yeah. So I will never forget that. I will never forget my introduction to Life on a Submarine, which when people ask me about it, I say, hey, do you ever see the movie Hunt for the Red October? They're like, oh, yeah, great film, great film. I said, yeah, 3% of the time. I'm like, well, what's the other 97% of the time? You ever seen a movie called Down Periscope?
Well, that's no joke. I tell people the movie Stripes, Bill Murray, of course.
Oh, yes.
That's a classic. Now, of course, it's comedy and farce, but truth be told, so much of my experience, granted it's reserved, so it's limited, but deployments and all kinds of things, Stripes is closer to the truth than I would have ever thought. Yeah, yeah.
I use
class
Stripes as a measure of my commanders and the command teams around me. We walked out of a building one time, and the commander I was with, I was a major, he was a lieutenant colonel. He hits something with his foot. He's like, "Have that removed."
Yes,
like, I like you.
I see it all the time.
That's funny.
I just looked that up. The Seahorse was decommissioned in 95.
Yes,
96?
It was the first boat I decommissioned out of Seattle, actually, up at Bremerton.
Wow.
Then it moved immediately over to Pearl Harbor.
I understand how that is because my bird's sitting in the boneyard out there in, was it Arizona, New Mexico, somewhere in there?
Davis Monthan.
Yeah.
All right, so I've got
still have your name on it?
Say what?
It used to.
I was asking Hillbilly if his bird had his name on it.
Got it.
It did at one time, but it became a wing bird at Eglin, I think, last or Langley before it ended up out at the boneyard.
Okay.
Actually, I might have a picture of it I can bring up.
So, Kacey, do you got any juicy stories from flight school? Everyone always has juicy stories from flight school. I hope.
Dude, flight school. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your definition of juicy. Do you mean like my story for my friend, or?
Well, anytime I've ever had a chance to talk to pilots, there's always the oops story. It seems like either something where they've been flying with somebody and somebody else did an oops, or they did an oops that they're willing to talk about. So
here's the thing. Like in flight school, I was pretty terrible. Like I was. There are two types of pilot in this world. There are those who are born with just naturally what we call hands, right? Just sort of a natural sense of how to control the aircraft, and they pick up very quickly on the appropriate thought patterns, I guess, as far as like situational awareness and how to think like a pilot, like an aircraft commander. There are those type of pilot, and then there are ones like me who have to bleed and sweat and cry our way through flight school. And I was very firmly in the latter category. So flight school was real tough for me. But I will say this, that there's two experiences in my life. I don't think that I could have made it through flight school if I had not been an Air Force Academy graduate, because the Air Force Academy taught me that I can do damn near anything for at least 4 years. Sure. Right? Like, sure. I can handle just about anything for 4 years at least. And so learning that about my sort of like personal endurance really allowed me to walk into flight school and just get slammed in the face with my own terribleness on the daily and be like, okay, that's cool. They can kick me out of here, but they can't make me quit. And so they're either going to kick me out of here, or I'm leaving with wings, or I'm leaving in a body bag. Those are the only three options, right? And
thankfully it wasn't option number 3 for you.
Right. Yeah. And so eventually I graduated. And I will say too, that like, despite my lack of aptitude, I do think that the attitude of, all right, I'm going to do what I need to do. Like, however many times I have to retake this ride, or however many times I have to go talk to the squadron commander and beg him not to kick me out of the program. I'm willing to do it because I want, because this is what I want. This is what I want to do. I do think that attitude won me allies among the instructor corps. And so they were willing to go to bat for me, and sit down with me and give me extra instruction and, like really kind of help me along. And it got better. Like, so the first half of pilot training was the T-37 because I'm old. And
Good old converters.
that was a fun little jet to fly, actually. Like, I really liked the aircraft. I just suffered through the program because the program.
So even though you're helicopters, you have to train on fixed wing jet training.
First, yes. Well,
Wow,
and
okay.
now it's no longer. Now it's the T6, which is a turboprop. So,
Okay.
but back in the day, yes, it was our primary training was the T-37.
Was
And
that
then
the?
after
Tweet.
I'm trying to remember which one that was.
Tweet.
the Tweet? Yeah,
I'm gonna go look that
it's
up.
a little
Yeah,
twin
it-
engine jet, and it's the one that they made in Vietnam. They put T-38 engines on it and called it the Dragonfly.
Oh, okay.
Kind of a badass airplane, actually.
Now I'm
They
tracking.
were using it in
Right.
South America and up into the 90s. You
Yeah.
know.
For ground attack, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
The
Well,
Dragonfly
tracking.
was serious business.
What's the real difference between an NF5 and a T-38?
I don't know what an NF5 is. So.
The F5 Talon was an attempt to.
Oh, an F5. I thought you
Yeah.
said
Yeah,
an
F5.
F5. I was
No,
like,
no. Sorry.
No,
big difference with a gun.
Yeah, no, it's pretty. It's. I mean, it's a different airplane. You know, it's pretty significantly different. So
Okay.
Did
But,
you fly the
right there-
T-38 too?
I
Yeah.
did not.
Can you
fly
see
the
that?
T-38. That's
There we
a
go.
T. That's a T-37. Yeah, made by Cessna. And it
So
was.
that's your
well,
first plane.
Correct. Well,
There's
I
a
did flight
T-38.
training in a Cessna 172 right after I graduated from the academy. But yeah, the first plane I have any kind of significant hours in was the T-37.
Okay.
So, yeah, and I never flew 38s because what we did is after tweets you would track select, and I track selected helicopters. So I went to Fort Rucker, and that's where I met my first warrant officer.
So for those
Fort
that don't
Rucker
know,
is-
Fort Rucker is the home of the Army warrants,
of-
and it's home of the pilots. Yep. All the Army
home of
pilots.
Army Aviation.
Yep.
Being at Rucker was a really good experience. It was good for me as as an aviator, because I kind of found my niche, right? Like I was much better at flying helicopters than I was at flying T-37s, and I still struggled. Like I still had to work really hard because I still didn't have that natural aptitude, but it was better, if that makes sense. And I enjoyed it a lot more. And the program was a little more relaxed because Tweets was really like a kind of a lead out program as well. Because at the time they had more applicants than they really needed to have graduate. So part of the purpose of Tweets was to be really hard to be an attrition program. So.
Right. No, that sounds like I'm going to name drop somebody that people can go look up. Ward Carroll is a thriller writer, but he is a prior naval aviator. He was a backseater in the F-14. He's got several videos on his channel. So when people get done watching this and if they want to go check out some interesting flight stories, Ward Carroll's channel, he's got some good ones from his deployments on the carriers.
So.
Okay. All right. Well, Brad,
Yes.
what stories you got, man? Come on.
My stories are boring. Again, I'm a POG. I got no combat stories. I mean, I hear what Kacey's saying, though, about grinding out the school. I kind of had to do that when I did candidate school. So for people that aren't familiar with the way the Army does it, most warrant officers are either pilots or they're technical dorks in some specialty. I'm a technical dork, and I came out of the one shop, which is personnel, paper pushing. I was goaded. No, maybe that's not the right word. I was strongly encouraged to go to warrant officer school by my mentor when she retired. She said, hey, you really need to go do this program now. And I went as an NCO. So I was an NCO and went to school. Most of us do that in the Army. We go as NCOs and we go to this thing called candidate school. And candidate school is like being plunged back into basic training, but it's harder, less sleep. You get beat on a lot more because at that point, like when we all go through, Lackland or Great Lakes or Fort whatever the hell, you at least have the benefit of saying, I don't know, because you literally are brand new and you don't know anything. Well, by the time I got to candidate school, we didn't have that excuse anymore. So it was a real eye opener. But I do remember there was one point where I almost wanted to quit. I went into the military with a funky knee that had been injured doing martial arts years before. And it was really a question mark all the way through basic. And I lucked out. It didn't go out on me in basic, but it did go out on me in candidate school. Like, we're on the final field exercise. We've got a week left. And then part of your graduation, you have to pass the final field march out of there. You have no choice. You can't, there's no such thing as a medevac. There's no waiver for it. You must march out. So I'm sitting there with a blown knee. I'd had the Singar's radio on my back for an exercise in the mud, and I just went down on the thing, and I was cursing myself because I was like, crap, I'm not going to be able to do this march. But then I thought, no, I have to do this. I have to graduate. I'm not getting recycled. I am not doing that. So I went to the medics the night before the final march out. Thankfully, my classmates were cool too, because there was a couple duties that they said, you know what, I'll just take your duty tonight. You can try to rest up. And then the night before, I went to the medics. I said, just give me all the ACE wrap and painkiller you can spare. That you're legally allowed to let me have. And I dosed up that morning, and I'm hobbling on this thing mile after mile, and all I think about is, it's okay. When it's done, I will heal. I limped for about 3 weeks afterward, but I made it. It is interesting how your mind goes to a certain place where you're just like Kacey said, I'm either going to die, or I'm going to graduate, or they're going to kick me out. I'm not going to quit. I am not going to quit.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course, you brought up one of the big things about being military, which is, that look you get from a civilian when you say, well, how did you deal with it? Duct tape and a couple of Motrin.
Yeah. Drive on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's no joke. Here's the thing that surprised me too, knowing nothing. So when I joined, I joined as an older guy, quotes older. I was like 26, 27 years old. So I was roughly 10 years older than many of the people around me when I was going through basic. I didn't know you could actually get chaptered out. Now, for people who are watching who don't know what that means, that's part of the UCMJ, the Code of Military Justice, and there are chapters in there that they can take you out of the service. Some of it is for medical, some of it's for psychological. Klinger back in the MASH days, he was always trying to get a Section 8. But I didn't know that there was such a thing as failure to acclimate. Yeah. And it surprised me how many people who were way younger than I was, way more fit. Like, we had one guy who was like a football player. This kid was really built, and I mean, he had no problem with the PT. What he couldn't do though was the daily grind, where your movements are controlled, everything about your life is controlled. You're constantly getting yelled at. You're constantly being corporally punished. Push-ups and smoking. We called it smoking back then. I don't know if they still do it. I assume they do. Where you're smoked, you're on your face for 2 hours while they sweat it out of you, and he just couldn't take it. And there were other kids like that too. I was telling the group here before we started, my dad actually talked me out of joining as a teenager, and I'm glad he did, because I probably would have washed out as a teen. I didn't have the discipline, and I didn't have the mental fortitude, right? It's all up here. Kacey, when you talk about that resonates with me very strongly, because I think so much of military experience comes down to, how can you stay right up in your head and be goal focused and push the pain away, or push the whatever's going on that's horrible. Just push it out and just, okay, I'm getting to that finish line. I don't care how I have to do it,
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting to me that you use the language "stay right," because I don't think that I did stay right. Like, it made me a little crazy.
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
there's an intensity. There's a certain intensity to those of us who have those types of experiences that people who don't have those types of experiences don't fully understand. And it's a little bit disconcerting, to say the least, usually, to deal with us. I've had some friends or I've had some conversations with girlfriends of mine about this, and they're like, yeah, you do, when you talk about stuff, sometimes like you get really fucking scary. Well, that's just how I am, because we get, and it is that goal focus, like, okay, this is the thing that matters at this moment. This is the only thing that matters. And all that other stuff, it's a factor, but I'm not focusing on that. I'm focusing on this thing. This is the thing that matters. And I find that, especially like in my writing and stuff, a lot of my characters tend to be military veterans or have connections with the military, because I find that piece of our collective psyche, if I can use such a grandiose term, really fascinating. And it isn't unique to the military at all, but it is unique to people who have those intense experiences, I think.
And we have experiences too in the military where it's trained out of us, right? I went to the airborne school, right? Basic parachutist course. And I went as a 20-year-old, actually I was 19 years old cadet. And so you go, and the first week is it's basically ground week is what they call it. So you're learning how to do the parachute landing fall, and you're learning how to do certain things. And then you move to tower week, which is the second week, where you make repeated jumps out of a 30-foot tower so that you get to the point where you're not even thinking about it, right? And then the end of that week culminates, they take you up on the 250-foot tower, drop you, and you have to control the parachute down. And then the third week is jump week. And you get to the point when you get out there for jump week, you're hooked up with the parachute and everything else. You waddle your ass out to the aircraft, and they go down the line on the aircraft, and they're tapping everybody's helmet, letting you know what number you are in which stick you're going to be that's going to jump out of the airplane. And in my case, I was a cadet. I had a bunch of Naval Academy midshipmen in my group too. And I'm sitting there, and the guy comes by and he taps me on the head and he says, first jump or third pass. And at that moment, that was the first time in almost 3 weeks where I had that moment of, I'm about to jump out of an airplane. Because you've got all of this that's just compressed out of you where you're not even thinking about it. So then, we go through the whole litany of commands and shuffle down to the door, and I pass my static line to the jump master. And he's like, stand in the door. And so you stand in the door, and literally
those are the 5 scariest words in the English language.
Yeah, my hands are on the door, my foot's out in the breeze, and I'm watching the wing of the C-130 bouncing in the humid Georgia air. And I have this moment of, that wing is really bouncing. And then the light goes green, the jump master slapped me on the ass, and I did exactly what I had been trained. Out the door. Yep. And eyes closed, 1,000, 2,000, parachute opens, and I look down, and it's like, oh my God, I jumped out of an airplane. About that time, my buddy Mike was behind me in the stick, and I hear him going, woo! You don't even think about it. So then at that point, you land up the first one, and you've got all this adrenaline high, and you're completely wasted because for 2 weeks you've been building to this, and then you jump and you realize this isn't that bad. And then you have to come back and do it 4 more times. And the third jump about kicked my ass. I did a feet butt head landing, and it's just kind of the way it works. But yeah, the military, so much of our training, it's designed to push all your resistance out of you. So having an experience like that where you like the tower, I think we probably jumped out of that stupid 32-foot tower 20 times. So you do it and you get used to it. That way, when the day comes, you're there.
Right. And the Navy does
running by the numbers.
The Navy does something similar with us in submarines. We have to be trained for both firefighting and for flood control. So we actually go to full-on firefighting training, going into enclosed spaces, fighting those fires, going into an enclosed space, having that flooding actually going on, and learning how to do it so that, yes, when it happens on the ship, and unfortunately it happened more times than I care to think about on my ships.
Firefighting
And flooding, both.
Really?
I dealt with both. More fires than flooding. I only dealt with serious flooding one time in my entire 20-year career. But, I mean, I had a couple of fires. Our hull insulation puts out a really black smoke. And I remember one time we'd had an electrical fire burst out into the insulation trapped in between a pair of ribs, and I'm in engine lower level, and it is so black that in my breathing apparatus, I've got my hand just right there, and I couldn't see my hand. You're going strictly on, okay, I've been trained. I know exactly where all my air plugins are. I'm feeling with my feet for the instructions. I'm grabbing the hoses, and you're going on that training. Like you said, Kevin, they have just taken it to such a point. It has become muscle memory. You don't think about what you're doing. You just do it. And it transfers over. I don't know how many times at this point I have unfortunately run into burning buildings to help fight fires, or gone into situations where massive wrecks on highways and things like that, because one thing we get trained to do is do exactly the opposite of what the human condition is, which is run towards that danger.
Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because but the other thing is that, like, it'll change. It does change the way that you think about stuff too, because when not just when your training hits, but when any sort of weird thing that is potentially dangerous hits, it flips a switch in your head, or at least in my head. And instead of being the, like, sort of, bouncy squirrel chasing, like, loud extrovert, whatever that I am, I get very calm and very focused.
And hyper focused.
On my last check ride, which will be my last check ride in the Air Force, because I'm getting ready to retire. But Congrats. On my last check ride, we were landing out at there's a range out near Mount Fuji. It's called creatively Mount Fuji Range. It's the Marine Corps.
The military.
It's the Marine Corps range, but you're right. We have LZs out there on the range. They use it for, like, their they did use it for their tank training when the Marine Corps had tanks. But anyway, we land out there. It's a great bunch of great LZs, really good training. And I went out there for my check ride. And so I'm an instructor. So I was doing an instructor check ride, which meant that, like, I had a student in the seat with me, a new guy, and I was teaching him what we were doing. And so we land in this one LZ, and it's probably the dustiest LZ that we have. And we brown out as much or more than I have in the 10 years since I got out of Iraq, right? Like, completely engulfed in dust, could barely see the ground. We were able to put it down safely, but it was like, okay, kid, that was a no shit brownout. How you feel, and it was good. He did great. We talked about how we were going to get out of there, because part of the reason it was so dusty is it's kind of a bowl, and we had these, like, obstacles ahead of us that we didn't want to hit on our way out, right? So we're talking about how we get out of there, and I go to do the takeoff, so the Huey has 2 engines. Or at least my model of the Huey does. And we're taking off, and I'm pulling power, and we're in the dust, just barely starting to clear the dust. And my flight engineer goes, "We've got a torque split. Number 1 just dropped to 0.
Ouch.
And I'm like, all right, but the switch flipped, right? Because that was weird. That's weird. So that shouldn't happen. Definitely don't want to lose an engine on takeoff, especially in a dusty LZ, when I'm pulling a bunch of power to get out of there. And I was like, all right, but I'm still climbing. So I was like, all right. In fact, I said, all right, but I'm still climbing. I'm going to continue. And so we continued to get out of the dust and accelerated away. And I looked down, and sure enough, our number 1 torque, which is like the measure of power that's coming from our engine, had dropped to 0. But the other engine gauges were all fine. So it was weird because it was happening on my torque gauge and my co-pilot's torque gauge, but all the other, like the engine health instruments were showing that the engine was healthy. So I was like, okay, I think it's clearly just an indicating problem, because we're not having any problems.
Bad gauge.
Two blockage.
Not a gauge, because it was 2 of them, and they're independent. The gauges are independent, but it was a signal problem from
so a sensor.
The guts back into working. I could explain it, but everyone would be bored. So
I would, but I'm a mechanic, so I love that kind of stuff.
But yeah, so we think it was a torque sensing problem. But anyway, so what were our options at that point, right? So we brought it back around, landed back in the same LZ because it was the closest one, and so the flight engineer's out to look at it, and they checked it out, and they're like, we think it's good. We think it's just the torque sensing problem. And so then we're like, all right, well, do we feel good about flying it home? And if we lose the engine on the way home, what's our plan going to be? And so we talked about all that and stuff. But that sequence of maintain aircraft control, analyze the situation, take the appropriate action, refer to checklist. It's just exactly that. It's muscle memory so much that even when something happens that's not related to aviation, but it's weird, I find that switch flipping, and I get very calm and very focused. And all right, what do I need to maintain aircraft control? I know I'm not in an aircraft, but what do I need to maintain control of this particular situation? And then what is the situation, and what's the appropriate action? So
I've seen that fail too. I mean, thankfully it was only in a training environment. So I guess I've got a little bit of a story. I'm wrong. I do have one story, but before that, there's a book I want to pitch. It's an old Vietnam novel called CW2 by a pilot, Lane Heath. And Kacey, you're reminding me of a line from that novel. And I assume this was taken directly from the writer's own experience, where he said, some of the people in his group when he was in Vietnam were kind of the swaggering guys that thought they were all that. But when it came time to make those crucial decisions, they would freeze up. They would lock up. Meanwhile, you had some of the very unassuming people who you would think, this guy doesn't seem like much. He's very quiet and kind of reserved. Those were the guys that would, maintain absolute control when the windscreen shattered and there's bullets coming up through the floor. Yeah, it's interesting because it's hard to train for that too, because you don't know until you're suddenly in that. I had an experience. We were doing night land navigation. So for those watching who don't know, this is one of the skills we were expected to know as an NCO, was to be able to navigate at night, no lights, no nothing. I mean, you're out there in the pitch black and you have to be able to, crouch down on the ground and cover yourself and pull out your little red light, elbow flashlight, and do land nav basically kind of almost by feel. Well, we were doing this during one of my NCO schools, and we're blundering through it. We're a bunch of blunderers and we're screwing it up, of course. And so as punishment, the kindly NCOs who are in charge of this thing, who are basically like drill sergeants for NCO school, they order gas, and we got to put the masks on. So it's like it's like 1 a.m. We have our masks on, which reduces your visibility even further, and introduces the problem of you're sweaty, you're tired, you can't breathe very well because you have the mask. We had a female NCO who literally panicked. She was at the front of the column. It was her job to take us up to this point, when we had done land nav the day before in the daytime, I knew where this point was, thankfully, because she just panicked. It overwhelmed her. The whole experience of she couldn't see, she couldn't breathe. She just started having like a literal panic attack. So we all had to group up and we pulled her mask off and we're like shining our flashlights in her eyes, and she's all dilated and flipping out and everything. And I felt extremely bad for her because I had never been pushed to that point physiologically, right? The mask bothered me, but it didn't bother me that bad. The mask really bothered her, to have a ruck on and be marching and you're laboring, breathing, and you can't see, and you got the damn mask on, and it took her over the edge, right? It was that moment where it was just too much. We ended up taking her up to the road, and the ambulance came and got her, and we didn't see her until the next day. She did graduate, which I was happy about, but I still felt really bad for her because, again, that was one of those moments where it just got to be too much, right? Like everybody's got a breaking point, theoretically, we all do. And you don't know, you kind of don't know, okay, am I really going to be okay, or am I not going to be okay? And how do you train for that? Or can you train? I guess that's the big question, right? Can you really train for it or not?
Yeah, to quote Quip, you don't know how somebody's going to react until they see the elephant.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So the thing that we talk about a lot of times, and this is kind of this was not a conversation at the beginning of my aviation career, but it's become more and more of a theme in the last few years, is that just exactly what you're talking about, right, Brad? Like everybody's got a breaking point. So you can't, if you're at your breaking point, like you can't help that. You can't not break if it is no shit your breaking point.
Yeah.
So there's only really two things that you can do. Number one, hopefully you have a good team who can compensate and help you out, like this NCO had you guys, to be able to help her out and give her the care that she needed in that moment to survive. And two, so build up your team, right? Have a good team, have good crew resource management, have the ability to to care for each other, and 2, you have to train to get back up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's going to happen. Everybody's going to fall down, right? Like, you know, I say this in a half joking manner, but that really is my family's motto is get back up, because, you know, so for those of you who don't know, my husband was he was an MH-53 gunner on MH-53 helicopters. That was pretty redundant. And
Is that the Jolly Green Giant?
Right.
That's the Jolly Green Giant.
Well, the Jolly Green was the
HH.
The original Jolly Green was the H3. The MH-53 was its name was the Pavlo.
Okay.
But yeah, it was sort of the successor aircraft, the special operations aircraft.
Okay.
He got shot in very end of 2006, and he was on the tail of his helicopter. They were in Iraq. They were going to go into this compound to get this dude. They had a team on board with an Iraqi interpreter, and the interpreter, in defiance of the instructions that Easy and the other aircrew members had given him, put his magazine in his weapon early. And Easy had just made his 1 minute out call, turned back around to get back on his weapon, and said it felt like something hit him in the. He said it felt like a baseball bat hit him in the side of the face, because the interpreter had put the magazine in his weapon and pulled the trigger. Negligent discharge, or perhaps not negligent. There's jury's still out on that. It might have actually been intentional, but anyway, point is, my husband got shot, and it like came through and blew out his eye, but he retained consciousness, and
oh man,
he actually he called out that he was hit. You know, the pilots did the go around. They flew him to Baghdad, and he walked off the helicopter. Now he had help; he was supported, but he walked off the helicopter and got into the ambulance by himself. And that image for me has always been like, you know, you get shot in the head, you can't help that, right? Like,
right.
You know, it's certainly not something you signed up for.
That's pretty epic right there.
But it happened. Yeah, exactly. It happened, but he got back up. And so, so whatever the situation is, that's the situation. Get back up.
So the eye was
whatever forward means.
Socket. His eye had been blown out of the socket. So the you were about to say 556. Yeah, it entered like right in front of his ear, came through, pierced his eyeball, bounced off his septum, like pushed his nose over. Oh my gosh!
And then went out the front, he was wearing night vision goggles, knocked his goggles off, and like just this side destroyed the whatever his sinus, right? Yeah. So he came back. He had to have a bunch of surgeries. They actually took bone from his leg, from his, is it the fibula that's not weight bearing? Whichever one is not weight bearing.
The small one, right?
Took like 18 centimeters of bone and rebuilt the eye socket so that it can support the weight of a prosthetic, but he doesn't wear it because I think it looks creepy.
that is absolutely a no shit. There I was. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's a no shit. There he was. It's not my husband. It's not my story.
Getting down on time. Can I close out with some shenanigans?
Please.
Yeah.
Okay. So
let's bring it up. Sorry, that was a little depressing.
Just a plug. 335th Chiefs.
Oh, there they are. Look at that.
There we go. That was, I don't remember if that was 96 or 97 that we had that over in Doha. But there's my bird. What's left of her.
Hello, pretty.
Missing her wings, missing her engines. 82 model F-15C. That was my last bird that had my name on her. Nice. Now, the shenanigans. We had the Luftwaffe stopped in at Tyndall Air Force Base down in Panama City, Florida. Helped these boys get some stuff moved around and all that. And they had one of their birds in the hangar. And I happened to be on mid-shift. I don't know if they found all the squadron stickers that I tagged this bird with. I opened every panel that I could, and I took panels off and put stickers on the inside of this aircraft. And you guys know how it is with unit stickers. You tag anything you can tag. Yep. I took a roll of squadron stickers and tagged this F4 and sent it back to Germany.
Oh my
They
God.
put it
I
in
gotta
our
see if I can
hangar,
find a
man.
picture.
It's fair game. They should have put a guard on duty.
That's awesome.
They used to do that to the Navy flyers if they landed on the wrong carrier.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you accidentally accidentally landed on the wrong carrier, they would tag the hell out of that plane before it got back to its original boat.
Yep.
So
All right, well, we are
you guys,
down. Oh,
you guys
get
are
something?
familiar with the Thunderbirds, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
What'd you do?
Very beautiful
Second
F-16s. Gorgeous
Second
birds.
best military aircraft group there is, right after the Blue Angels.
Uh-huh.
You know what?
Yeah.
I would argue that the snowbirds from Canada are better, and maybe that makes me unpatriotic, but those guys are
that
fucking
hurt.
badass.
Oh.
They are badass.
What
Anyway,
types in that? We need
Thunderbirds.
him in here real quick.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful aircraft. Very well maintained, very well painted, very well guarded. At one of the, I won't be specific because I don't want to get people in trouble, but at one of the air shows that we had at Andrews Air Force Base, I was on alert because I typically tried to pull alert during the air show because it was a pretty good deal. And we made friends with a member of the Thunderbirds, and not one of the pilots, but one of their staff. He had a number though, so he was like a legit member of the Thunderbirds. And he was like, "You guys want to go out and see the bird?" And we're like, "Yeah, we do." And so on the Thunderbirds, and I can't find a picture, but I'd show it to you. But on Thunderbird number 1, it has the 1, and then it has like a circle of stars around it.
Mhm.
One of those stars got covered up by a 1st Helicopter Squadron patch.
Nice.
Well done. Nicely done.
Yeah,
All right.
pretty
so
sure that was a coup.
we are down to the last few minutes, so let's go ahead, go around, close out. Tell us where we can find your stuff. Kacey, you go first.
Okay, so my website is www.kaceyezell.org. You can also search for Kacey Ezell on Amazon and find pretty much everything I've ever published there. I primarily write for Bain and for Chris Kennedy Publishing, so you can find me on their websites as well. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Thank you so much for. Oh, also, I'm on Facebook, and then if you find me on Facebook, and I also have a Discord channel. So if you find me on Facebook and you want to chat with me on Discord, shoot me a message or whatever, and I'll send you a link. So,
All right, Gants.
You can find me on Amazon. I write for Bain and for Three Ravens Publishing primarily, and that really is the best place to find me right now. I don't have much of a social presence on media.
Kevin.
KevinIkenberry.com. Like Kacey, I write primarily with Chris Kennedy Publishing and Bain now. So you can find me there. You can find me on Facebook as well. I don't do the Instagram or anything along those lines. So that's probably the easiest way to do it.
Brad.
gotta get on the gram, man.
So I'm still
Keep hearing that.
psyched about my Dragon Award for my. Thank you.
Hold on.
You
hold
should
on,
have
hold on.
introduced yourself as Dragon Award winner.
There we go.
Dragon Award winner! Yay! So yeah, Star-Wheeled Sky out in paperback. It's been. I hate to say it. This came out right in the middle of the pandemic last year, so please go find yourself a paperback. Yeah, Bain Books mostly. I've published a few stories with the Kennedy guys for the Four Horsemen universe. I've got 2 more stories coming out in Bain anthologies later this year, and hopefully some new stuff in Analog coming soon. And I'm on Facebook.
Did you do World Breakers, Brad?
No, I wish I would have. When that released, that was one of those anthologies. I was like, damn it, I wish I had a story on that.
Okay,
You
and
did
can
though,
find my
right? You
stuff.
did.
Yeah. Kacey and I are both in that one.
Cool. Nice.
Yeah.
You can find my stuff over at WilliamJosephRoberts.com or at 3ravenspublishing.com because I am the head of the 3 Ravens. And that was, I do have one extra little message.